guys, Chris here with Bushcraft Survival and Primitive Skills Mickey Wilson. So I'm not able to go live with this video because a lot of what I recorded I did not have service where I was at. But this is another plant video, and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about why knowing your plants, especially in your area, is important. So plants can provide all the medicinal uses that modern medicine brings to us, as well as edible uses. You can't just go, like say shit hit the fan, you can't just go out and eat meat. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, you can, but you're gonna wind up getting sick. You need vitamins, you need your essentials and stuff, and you can't get a lot of that from meat or from animals. You can only get it from plants. So learning your plants and learning to correctly identify those plants is a very valuable skill, and a lot of people overlook this skill in the bushcraft, survival, prepping, and primitive livings community. They not so much the primitive livings, because most of the primitive living people are up on their plants, but a lot of us are not. And that's one thing I want to recommend to each and every one of you, is to get out there in your area, especially this time of year when stuff is starting to grow, so that you can learn to identify these plants when they're younger. You know, not all plants are edible at their adult stage, and not all plants are edible at their young stage. It depends on the plants, but you need to get out there and figure out what's in your area and learn about these plants so that you know what you can and can't eat when you get out there. You know, and there's plants that can heal almost every issue that we have that modern medicine takes care of. But in Western medicine, we kind of stray away from all that. Now in Eastern medicine, they don't. They use plants for about everything. But get out there and learn your plants, guys. They're very important, and they can help you survive, if not make you the one that does survive when everybody else doesn't. So here's a pretty cool plant, and as far as plants goes, it rates as high as yucca on me. Here's some nice yucca asparagus. It's pretty mature. Gonna have a lot of blooms on it this year. But this plant, you can use the stalks to make cordage. You can make baskets, you can make sandals from the fibers. You can use the stalks to start a fire, and they work almost as good as the yucca stalks do. This plant has tons of medicinal purposes, from teas to salves and poultices and such that you would make from it. Good for coughs and wounds and all kinds of stuff. It's a very medicinal plant, but you can also eat it. You can eat the roots, the leaves, the flowers, the little fruits that it puts on. And what we call this out here is sagebrush. And this is some sagebrush and it has a smell very similar to sage. This also works as a great bug repellent if you were to burn it. And it also works as a smudging. I know the natives used to smudge with it. But this plant, it's got a lot of uses, almost as many or more than the yucca plants out here. And that's sagebrush. Hey guys, so another plant, and there's many different varieties of this plant, but another plant that has an edible quality to it is grasses. Now, certain grasses you could probably eat the grass, but there's not really enough nutrition in it. There's no point in eating it. But the seeds, grass seeds. Now, collecting grass seeds is a very extensive process. And so you're going to want to use it as an additive to other flower sources. But here you can see a CRP field here. And this is some CRP grass. Now, CRP grass, you see these wispy pieces here? You can make cordage from CRP grass, or any grasses. You can make it from the green grass, you can make it from the dead grass. Now with grasses, that's one of those plant fibers that doesn't always like to be twisted. So grasses is a cordage that you would want to make using a type of braiding or some type of sinnet to make. I found a patch of what we call skunk weed out here. I think the correct name is buffalo gourd. I've also called them just gourds before. So these put on a fruit. They're about yay big around, about the size of a baseball. They smell very skunky, which is why we call them skunk weed, as well as they don't taste very good. Now, the natives used to use the roots of this plant for tons of different medicinal purposes. Almost everything you can think of, they would use the roots of this plant for that purpose. Now, I remember reading years back, the Aztecs, I think it was the Aztecs. Anyway, they went through a period of famine, and they would grind up the seeds from inside of the gourds, and they would add them to water and make this kind of mushy stuff. Now, I've actually tried this, and in my reading it said they didn't enjoy eating it, and I know why. It is one of the nastiest things I have ever put in my mouth. I will never try it again. But this is skunk weed, or buffalo gourd. It's the leaves feel very similar to pumpkins, maybe a little stouter than pumpkin leaves would be. Very skunky flavor. Here you can see some, oh, nope, I don't see any buds yet. You can see some more of it. The root systems on this are extremely extensive. So, you know, a plant about this size, it may have anywhere from a 6 to 8 foot root system. And one thing the natives, when they would harvest these, here you can see the shell, part of the shell of an old one. So when the natives would harvest these, they would take very great care in not harming the roots when they would use this plant. Because if they harm the roots, they thought it would harm the body, because they were using this as a medicinal plant. But it's an excellent medicinal plant. If you're going to harvest some, I would suggest harvesting some of these younger ones, and just keep in mind not to harm the roots. The natives had their reasons for everything. Hey guys, so one thing on the skunk weed, don't eat it. Now, I know there was a native group in the past that used the seeds, like I was explaining, but don't eat the fruits or the leaves and such of this plant. They're actually somewhat toxic, and I know from personal experience when I was a young kid that if you eat the fruits, if you can get past the nasty flavor of the meat inside that fruit, it tastes worse than the seeds did. But however, I know from personal experience when I was a young kid that if you eat the meat from this fruit, you will have bowel issues. I had diarrhea, big time diarrhea. So I would suggest not eating anything from this plant. However, you can use the roots in teas and salves and all that type of stuff. And you can use the seeds, but I wouldn't even recommend eating the seeds because they are disgusting. Hey guys, so here is another type of grass, and we all eat this plant. Everybody knows this plant. But here's a bit of history that a lot of people don't know. And this plant's wheat. You can see this is all a wheat field here. So the wheat we eat today is not the same wheat of the Bible. So in the past, all of that wheat that they're talking about is actually known as Einkorn, and it is a relative to this. I actually think the wheat we eat today was created from Einkorn. So this is actually not as resistant to droughts or bugs. Now, the issue with gluten, you know, there's certain people who have to have gluten-free breads. And a lot of people think, well, you know, how did they have gluten-free stuff back in antiquity and before and medieval time and all that stuff? Well, that's because Einkorn is more gluten-free than wheat. But Einkorn looks very similar. The kernels, they're not as long, they're more short and stubby than wheat. But Einkorn, you know, if this wheat field, say, it never got farmed, over the course of some years, there wouldn't be any wheat growing here anymore. It would all have been taken over. All this would have died out. Now, if this was a field of Einkorn growing for years and years and years, there would still be Einkorn growing here. I found some what I call prairie mallow growing out here, and you can see it up here. This is globe mallow, I think is the correct name for it. So every part of this plant is edible. The young shoots are best when eaten raw, as well as the flowers. These seed pods up here, you would want to cook similar, I guess, to like an artichoke or something, or say a sunflower, unopened sunflower bed. The leaves can be chewed raw as well as the flowers. They would help soothe the sore throat. You can make poultices from basically every part of this plant, and they are good for skin inflammations or blisters and such, as well as you know, if you are chewing on the leaves or the flowers to help with stomach inflammations and things, you can make teas from the leaves and the flowers that do the same thing. So that is globe mallow or prairie mallow. There's a few different varieties and colors and heights that they can grow to. Just depends on what region and area you live in. Hey guys, there's a bunch of prairie mallow. You can see a whole bunch over in here, back up in there. Hey guys, so I was just showing you the globe flower here, and if you see this plant here growing and some more over here, this is tick seed, or a type of tick seed. And some types of tick seed, they've got some red right in around in here. But this plant, it's not necessarily edible, but what you can do is dry this plant and dry the roots and use it as a coffee substitute. As well, what the natives used to use this for, and I'll get you a closer view of it, but they would dry this plant and make it into a tea and use it to help with diarrhea issues. So that's some prairie tick seed for you. I wanted to show you guys something cool. So here is a field full of tickweed. There's tons of it through here. Gorgeous. Hey guys, so here's a kind of another neat plant. This is actually a relative to the dandelion or the lettuce plants. Has a similar flavor. All parts of this plant are edible. Now, when we talk about edible plants, when I say all parts are edible, that just means it's non-poisonous. It doesn't mean you can't eat it. It just doesn't mean that all parts are going to taste that great. But this plant reminds me similar taste-wise to eating a dandelion. And there's a few different varieties of Salsify. Depending on your area, the leaves can be a little different. There's actually a more known cultivated version, which is known as the oyster plant, and I've grown some of those. Now you can use the wild salsify the same way you would use the cultivated version, or the oysters. So the roots down here in the bottom, and if you've ever ate oyster plants or salsify, you know the flavor that they kind of taste like. But if I had to describe it to something that it would taste closely to, I would have to say parsnips would be about the closest thing I can think of. But on Salsify, most generally the heads will look like this. It doesn't matter which variety, the heads generally always look the same. The leaves some leaves are a lot wider than these, but this is some Prairie Salsify or goat's beard. Hey guys, so if you'd watched my other plant video, I showed you guys some central Kansas thistle, and where I live here in western Kansas, if you go about an hour west of here, this stuff you can find it everywhere, clear going up to the Rocky Mountains. And this version that we get out here, and I've been driving around quite a while trying to find you guys a version of this, and I just found one here in the ditch. So this version's a lot thornier than that version of thistle that you saw in my other video. Now you can still eat it the same way, and you'd still want to get the heart out the same way. This just has more thorns on it. Now, I have never seen the thistle back at Central Kansas bloom, so I don't know exactly what those flowers are like. But the thistle we get out here in western and eastern Colorado has another use, and that is for fire kindling. So here is the thistle I'm talking about. Now if you look, this has got a lot bigger thorns on it than the thistle back there in Central Kansas, but for fire. So these pods up here, these seed pods, when these bloom and dry, the outsides become hard and this inside has a fluff to it, very similar to cattails, and it will take an ember every bit as good as a cattail. These flowers here, these actually bloom a light pink color. But the farther west you go, the taller they get. You know, I've seen them a good, this one here is about 14 inches tall. I've seen them a good twice that height. But up here in these tops, if you can find them after they've bloomed, this fluff in there makes excellent fire kindling. As well as you can eat, after you take this fibrous layer off of the outside, you can eat the heart of the stalks on thistle. And it makes some okay cordage, the fiber does. It's not the strongest stuff, but it does work in a pinch. Hey guys, so this is one of my favorite prairie flowers. And when you get into the grasslands, you can see these things everywhere, and they're gorgeous. But it's known as blanket flower, and it does have a couple uses. So you can make a tea from this flower and use it to help in urinary, like urinary tract infections or painful urinary, if you're having pain when you pee, basically, you can take this and it will help relieve that. As well as you can make a poultice out of it and use it on gout. And this is one of the few plants that I know of that you can use on gout. I don't have gout issues. I know people that do have gout issues, but this is a natural way to help treat gout. And here is what this flower looks like. Blanket flower. Here's some that is a little younger, has just barely starting to bloom here. Some unopened buds there. Gorgeous prairie flower. Hey guys, I'm driving away from the blanket flower, and I just realized I forgot to mention one of the coolest things about blanket flower. So you can make seed butter from it to use as, you know, to spread on bread or to use in cooking and such. And so what you want to do is you want to dry the seeds of blanket flower, And then after they're dry, you want to crush them up with your mortar and pestle, and you'll create seed butter. And that stuff is good. If you've never had seed butter, I suggest you try some seed butter because it's pretty good. Hey guys, found another grass for you. Indian ryegrass here. Whole bunch of it. See it over there too. So like most grasses, the seeds, you can eat the seeds. This stuff can also be made into some cordage as well. It's pretty stout. Even the leaves have some pretty decent strength to them. So, but Indian ryegrass, it's another one of those you would add the seeds from this to another type of flower. Here's another grass for you, and I call this Foxtails. You can see a whole bunch of it here. And when this ripens up, it'll become even more fluffy, which is why they like to call it Foxtails, or I like to call it Foxtails as well. Now, I want to tell you a little tip on this stuff. So, I've used these and ate the seeds in here before. And you can add these to flour. Now, when you go to harvest these, you want to make sure all these little fluffs, you want to make sure you get every one of those out that you can before you eat it, because you get one of these down in your teeth and that thing will stay there, I kid you not, months. They are almost near impossible to dig out of your teeth. But this is Foxtails grass. Hey guys, so I just showed you the foxtail grass, and I found some foxtail barley, and this is a wild type of barley. You can see it growing here, but it has that same foxtailness on the ends, but this is actually a type of barley here. Foxtail barley. Hey guys, I found some henbit growing here. So henbit, you can eat the flowers, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the shoots. The shoots are better when they're a bit younger. You can add this to salads, you can cook it. It's not too bad. There's some more of it growing there. It's very nutritious as well. I'm pretty sure it's pretty high in iron content. So, and iron's pretty important, so it's not a bad plant. This is some henbit. Hey guys, I found some prairie grass growing here. And this is it didn't taste too bad. You can do with prairie grass the same that you can do with most other grasses. I want to say this is a cousin, or maybe it's the same plant, to rescue grass. And rescue grass, I know, is native to South America, but I think this is a cousin to that. This is some prairie grass for you. Hey guys, so here's some cheat grass, and you can use the seeds just like you would most of the grasses. It makes some decent braided cordage. These are some short-term or emergency stuff. These stalks are pretty stout. You can see some more of it growing over here. This stuff is known out here as the Western Scourge. So this stuff, it grows worse than most other weeds. It'll stick into your socks and such when these are ripe, these seed pods, and that just helps transplant this plant all over the place. Well, it'll stick in your dogs, it'll stick in cows, it'll stick in about everything, and that's one of the reasons it's called the Western Scourge out here, because it just comes up everywhere. It's a nuisance plant, but it's palatable. You can use it to feed animals and such, and the seeds up here we can add to flour. So there's some cheatgrass for you. So I think I found some sand dune flower. It's a type of wallflower, and they're actually an endangered flower if I remember right, but people like to put them in their gardens and such. They attract butterflies and bees. So this plant is pretty poisonous. In small quantities it can be pretty toxic, and large quantities just even worse. I do think the seeds can be used to help in fevers, but this is one of those plants that I don't mess with because it's toxic, so I don't mess with any parts of it generally. But this is sand dune wallflower. Pretty flower. There's different varieties. You can get some that have some more of some orangish colored petals on them. But this is some prairie sand dune. That's what I've always called it. Hey guys, we got some soapweed or yucca getting ready to start blooming out. Hey guys, so here's a plant that grows a lot of places in the US, and it's known as pepperweed. So the reason it has the name pepperweed is you can use the seeds as a pepper substitute, and they actually taste very similar to pepper. Now the leaves, you can eat the leaves raw, but the older the leaves get, the more slightly toxic they become, I guess, and especially bitter. But here's some pepperweed for you. Some young pepperweed. Hey guys, so here's a plant that I believe is a relative to the mustard plant. We call it musk mustard. I think it's also known as crossflower, I believe. But you can find this around ant dens a lot. Ants love this stuff, but the leaves are edible, and they're actually somewhat tasty and good in salads. But here's some musk mustard, and if you can see, it has a very similar, the seed pods here, they look very similar to mustard plants. Some more of it here, and some growing over there. Now the reason I believe it is called crossflower is if you look at the flowers there, they make a cross. So I found some Prairie Aster here. You can see going at the purple flower, and there's other varieties. There's some white aster, and there's a few different varieties of aster. But one thing I do know about asters is that the natives used to make aster flowers and such into teas to help with snake bites. And they would also make them into poultices to put on the snake bites. This is some Prairie Aster for you. Hey guys, I found some barley growing here. Looks very similar to wheat, but barley has bigger grains or bigger kernels than wheat does. Not sure if it's wild barley or not, but it's barley. I know that. Chris here. Sorry about the wind, Kansas, but I wanted to show you guys a cool plant, and so I call this wild tomato. It's very similar to tomatillo, so it'd be basically like a wild tomatillo plant, as you can see here. these here. See, this one's got some buds coming on up there. Now I'll show you what they look like. Okay. Where's my thumb? Right there. See that? How it has this little sack on it, very similar to a tomatillo. When this sack here turns brown, you will have a yellow or orangish type color small tomato in here. Now you do not want to eat these when they're green. Wild tomatoes, especially this type of wild tomato, they're somewhat toxic when they're green. So you need to let the tomato ripen up, and one way to tell if it's ripe is when these outside leaves have dried up.